I'm basically just making this as an example of how to use a tool like this with a drum loop to create groove shadows very, very quickly. But it's also intended for people like Korg, Yamaha, Roland, Steinberg, Logic, and the DJ console makers like Serato or Tractor, which is Native Instruments. Basically, you can think of these groove shadows for your systems, and they can be similar to this concept. This is one way to kind of mess with these loops. So groove shadows, really quickly, it's just basically rhythmically made musical sound design, and you basically just create crazy rhythms from sound, and you can use real world textures, or you can use spectralized digitally processed sounds, and you want to try to make them kind of musical. So what this does is this automatically does that, and that's probably what your systems can do. This has 6 of them going simultaneously, but there's no limit. I mean, it's really incredible the amount of things you can do. So before I get into how this works, which I've covered in another video, I'll just go over like what's going to happen. So what's going to happen is play a little groove shadow as an intro. Then I have the basic groove shadow behind a drum loop. And then I have a modified example so you can hear what a slight modification sounds like. Then I have another one, and then I have an example of how you can modify the pattern so you can extend the groove shadow. And the next one I did the same thing, messing with the pattern. Okay, but in the next one I showed like how you can just insert very easily, very quickly, a new groove shadow, and then I had some modification with the mod wheel on the fly because I happened to be able to do that with that particular preset. I did it again, and I did it again, and I basically just wanted to illustrate like how these work in the context of their main purpose, which is to stimulate like percussive sounds and drum sounds, but they can be used for anything. I mean, it's just incredible like the amount of applications these has, which is why I think they work great in keyboards, which they're totally missing in action since I created the concept, which is a bummer. So anyways, here's how it goes. And this one's just an open window for like the last one I worked on, so it doesn't really matter. But okay, so that's the gist of what's going on with groove shadows. Those are mostly atonal. The whole groove shadow concept is based around the principle to make like sound design oriented, rhythmic patterns. So you don't want to hit too much melody, but of course there's always some kind of thematic undertone, which with the right tools you can of course augment all of that. So anyways, this particular engine has 6 groove shadows going, and then it has various ways to sculpt the tone. And then it has ways to adjust the pan of those groove shadows, and then it has a way to randomize the original source sound. So when you hear a groove shadow, and I'll try to give an example here. That's the default preset if you download this instrument, which I'll include in the link. It's at Dropbox right now. You can use this in MXXX. So that's the whole thing. But what happens when you start disabling some of these? Let's take a listen. So I'll put it on loop. So taking these 2 off, I took away some of that percussion. That's how we have like all 6 of these firing off simultaneously. So if we can isolate things we like or don't like, we can either mute it, change it up with this contouring system, or randomize the tone. And then each of these has an ARP. In this particular context, I'm firing off ARPs. So when you're hearing these little percolating patterns, it's coming from these ARPs. And I have a way to randomize the ARP on the fly, and I have a way to halftime the ARP, and then I have also the way to shuffle the ARP. You could of course change tempo. The other thing that's happening with this engine is I have all these additional tools. So you have all these groove shadows that can then run through these additional tools to mess with extra DSP you might want to do to complement the existing groove shadow. And I did actually include a little master tempo section here. So there is a way to adjust the tempo of the groove shadow. If you wanted to have a little drift to make it more human or whatever, you could do that. So these are just some examples. And basically we're talking about the groove shadow source material itself, which could be a whole palette of things, thousands and thousands of different kinds of sounds or things that can be made randomly. And then we're talking about like filtering, and then we're talking about like messing with tonality, and then we're talking about messing with the volume, messing with the pan, quickly randomizing the tone. And then in this section here, we're talking about the actual pattern that is generating the groove shadow, and then randomizing it, and then messing with like how the pattern is performed, and which includes up to shuffle. But of course, there can be more parameters based on your groove shadow. So that's the gist of that. I don't want to go too crazy. I hope you can make some sense of this cool concept and how it applies to so many applications for music production, music inspiration, and things like that, and also helping and aiding the beefiness and the uniqueness of your own creations.